Good morning on this last Sunday in August. I'm glad that you're joining the lesson for today. This is our last lesson in the Summer Quarterly. The new fall books are available at the church if you'd like to get one. Our lesson today is also the last one from Song of Songs. The title is Relational Investment. It comes from chapter 5 if you follow in your Bible. In our lives, we invest in many things. We invest our time to earn a diploma or degree, our efforts to succeed in a chosen career, our time and energy for health and fitness, and we invest our money in retirement plans, and etc. Many other things that we invest our time in. Many times we fail to see that we also must invest in our relationships. If we invest first in our relationship with God, our guide for investment with others becomes easier to understand and follow through. Song of Songs is a love song about Solomon's marriage to a Shulamite woman. The language is intensely personal and intimate, and for that reason I suggest that you read it through because our lesson focuses only on a few of the scriptures. The entire book is a celebration of God's gift of romantic love. It teaches that married couples must invest in their relationship, and both must invest. It also teaches that God's people have to invest in their relationship with Him. Our relationship with God requires time and energy, the kind of time that focuses on God and in conversation with Him. Our time in congregational worship is good, and it's fairly simple. We get dressed, we go to church, or we turn on the TV or your phone or your laptop, whatever you use. We listen to the sermon, and that is, unless our minds drift to what we're going to have for lunch or what we're going to do after lunch or what's on our to-do list for next week, or remembering what we didn't do last week. We have to invest. Now, congregational worship and collective worship is good, but we also have to invest in our personal, private time for this relationship. And we do that with Bible study and with prayer. This chapter from the Bible is a love letter between Solomon and his wife, but the entire Bible is God's love letter to us. Last Sunday's lesson was a time prior to the marriage, and in today's lesson, the couple has been married, they've had and resolved some conflicts, they have experienced learning to live together as one while growing in their relationship. And our first scripture for today is chapter 5, verse 6. I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had withdrawn himself and was gone. My soul failed when he spake. I sought him, but I could not find him. I called him, but he gave me no answer. This is the description of a second dream. Last Sunday's lesson, the woman was having a dream, and it started out pretty good and turned into being a nightmare. And this one was a little bit much like that. It was the couple was now married, and for some reason she was sleeping alone in her bedroom. It was late when her husband came to the door, and he wanted to come in. She hesitated because she had bathed and already gone to bed. And just moments later, she did go to the door, but her husband had already left. He was physically absent, but this verse could also verify that he had become emotionally absent, and that's why she was having such a restless night. The storybook version of the wedding had developed into the familiarity of marriage over time. Life begins to take over, and emotional support begins to wane unless both people are committed to keeping the relationship strong and alive. Both partners needed the support, the reassurance, and the encouragement that stress and everyday occurrences tend to rob and overshadow. When she realized that her husband was no longer at her door, she was heartbroken. She realized that her hesitation in opening the door had not helped their situation. Sometimes we get so caught up in our own little pity party and in our pitiful feelings that we forget another person and their feelings are at stake as well. And just as she did in her dream before, she went out in the city to look for her husband. And then that brings us to verse 7. The watchmen that went about the city found me. They smote me. They wounded me. The keepers of the walls took away my veil from me. Once again, the guards found her, but they were not kind this time. They beat her. They gave her painful wounds, and they took her veil from her. The events of this part of the dream were probably a result of the deep pain that she felt over the disappearance of her true love. She was not only disappointed, but she found herself in a state of despair, confusion, and regret for not allowing him into her room. The church, or the believers, is the spiritual bride of Christ. He's the bridegroom, but he's been taken away from his bride, physically taken away. Many times, Christ will try to come into the hearts and lives of people, but he's turned away, just as the groom in this dream. And those who do not accept him may eventually encounter regret and pain and suffering, just like this bride did in these verses. So she decides that she'll solicit the help of some others in verse 8. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, that you tell him that I am sick of love. In this verse, she's asking the young women of Jerusalem to help her find her husband. She, as well as her husband, had gotten into a state of indifference, but his disappearance had bolted her back into reality and into a fear that she may have a life without him. Marriages get into trouble when one or both spouses step out of physical and or emotional presence. It takes an intention and a deliberate effort to be physically present and emotionally present. And that's not something that just happens just because you happen to be living in the same house. It is a mindful target that has to be the aim of both partners. She wanted the women to deliver a message that she loved him and was not willing to give up on them, even with the beating that she had endured. And you would think that these women would immediately go off to follow her instructions because, after all, she was married to the king. But instead, they began to ask her some probing questions in verse 9. What is thy beloved more than another beloved, O thou fairest among women? What is thy beloved more than another beloved, that thou dost so charge us? The questions that they asked prompted the woman to reflect and remember what it was that attracted her to her husband in the first place. And her memories probably took her back to before their marriage, maybe when they took a walk and they talked in the vineyard on that spring day. Remember the conversation they had about the little foxes that could destroy a vineyard, which really represented the little problems in marriage that could destroy it. And she probably remembered the wedding day and the celebrations that went along with the ceremony, and also some time that they had spent together since then. And even though they seemed to be at a crisis point in their marriage, she had fond memories and the commitment that they had made to each other. Any couple who intends to grow in love for each other is wise to focus first on growing in God's love that he has for each of us, and then expressing that love in their relationship. Without an expression of love, their marriage can become a meaningless, habitual response to each other rather than a good relationship. And God intends a much more rewarding experience than just stumbling through a day-to-day event. So in response to the questions, the woman begins to describe her vision of her husband, and this would be in verses 10 through 16. My beloved is white and ruddy, the chiefest among 10,000. His head is as the most fine gold. His locks are bushy and black as a raven. His eyes are as the eyes of doves by the rivers of waters, washed with milk and fitly set. His cheeks are as a bed of spices, as sweet flowers. His lips like lilies, dropping sweet-smelling myrrh. His hands are as gold rings set in the beryl. His belly is as bright ivory overlaid with sapphires. His legs are as pillars of marble set upon sockets of fine gold. His countenance is as Lebanon, excellent as the cedars. His mouth is most sweet. Yea, he is altogether lovely. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. They asked what made him so special, and she answered with a vibrant, detailed description. She remembered every detail that had attracted her to him. He would stand out in a crowd because of his physical traits. He was healthy, full of vitality, and he had a dynamic personality. His eyes captivated her. She compared them with the doves that represented tranquility and gentleness and peace. She was fortunate enough to be one who got close enough to smell his fragrance that was compared to beds of spices and perfumes that signified he was of a royal family because those items were considered to be luxury items. When she described him using the words gold and ivory and sapphires, that indicated his great worth, and that was a literal worth. He was the king, but it was also his worth in her eyes as well. His body stood tall and immovable, like strong as the special cedars of Lebanon. His mouth, she remembered his kisses, but also she remembered his words that were kind, and he verbally expressed his love for her. You need to go read those scriptures. She remembered that her husband was and still is desirable to her. And then she referred to him as her friend. A lifelong commitment to a marriage relationship is one in which the husband and the wife share together. It's not going to make it with just one. They're more than lovers, they are friends, and in fact, they are best friends. She honored their friendship as much as she relished their romance. And just as romantic relationships grow and change across the years, friendships grow stronger too. And she knew she could count on him to be there for her no matter what happened in their future. Now, as we've taken a look at just a few verses from Song of Songs, we see that each one of us has a longing for relationships in our homes and with God. God has made us to be social creatures and to long for company with others. We've also seen how important it is to value all parts and every aspect of our relationships, whether that's with a spouse or with God. Now, the question that we need to consider today then is, how can we keep from becoming complacent or taking these relationships for granted? And here's a more personal one. What is your own personal level of commitment to the relationships with your spouse, if you have one, or with God? I want to thank you for joining in today. I see on Facebook that people do view these lessons, but I don't know who you are or from where you live, and that's not so important to me. It's important, I hope, that you can receive some sort of message and understanding from the lessons. But what I would like to say is that in this area, we were very blessed to be spared from the wrath of Hurricane Laura, and for that we need to be so very thankful. Sometimes we take things for granted and we just say, phew, boy, we dodged that bullet. But we also need to be mindful of the people who were not so lucky and who were in the path of the strong winds and the flooding waters. It was not too long ago that we were in that same situation. We experienced the same kind of problems. And the help that flowed into our area was so greatly needed and appreciated. I'm sure a lot of you remember it. So we want to keep all of these people in our prayers, and if there's any effort that we can do to help provide their needs during this time, I'm sure that they would so greatly appreciate it. And in your prayer time, remember our government leaders, the local ones, the state ones, and the national ones. And I know it seems like COVID and national unrest has taken over our lives, but we still have a lot to be thankful for. We have more blessings than we do disasters, and we need to keep in mind what we do have, the blessings that God's given to us, and the ones that we just take for granted every day. I want to thank you again. Next week we'll start in a new book, and it will start with the study of the book of Isaiah. I hope you'll join again and that you'll have a blessed week. I pray that we all stay safe, you stay safe, and help keep others safe as well. Thank you.